Hello everyone. In week 9, we will learn about markets for technology. This is a very vast topic, and what I'm first going to give you is a brief overview of what we are going to cover in this topic. After learning about the basics, which will include what is market for technology, its typology, type of different licenses, what is the process of licensing, and the historical context, we will understand why the market for technology is required or needed from the perspective of large firms, small firms, and also what is the role of absorptive capacity in determining such transfers. We will also look at how patents facilitates the market for technology. What are the special IP management techniques that you need to know in order to facilitate the transfers of patent. We will learn the challenges faced by the universities in the process of technology transfer. One very important concern with respect to technology transfer is that of an international technology transfer. What do we mean here? Effectively, if you look at that, there might be a concentration of at least creation of the knowledge output in certain economies. If that happens, then how can the other economies now gain from the technology which is available in the other countries? In that case, the role of international technology transfer becomes very prominent. Moreover, if you think from a point of view of mid of 20th century, when many of the economies were at a phase of a developing or a least developing countries, and there were a certain set of countries which has invested in research and development for a relatively longer period of a time, and now they were enjoying the fruits of that particular investment. So is it possible that the other economies, instead of reinventing the wheel, can in fact engage with the other economies, learn from them? There is a process through which the technology gets transferred and then help in their development process. So it is in that context we will understand the role of multinational enterprises in the international technology transfer. Forward, first of all, let us see what is a market for technology. Here what we are looking at is a kind of a transaction, and this transaction is related to either use or the creation of technology. When we're talking about the use of technology which will be now transacted, that can relate to the licensing of the patents or any other intellectual property. However, it need not be limited to that. It is much more broader than that, and it also includes the know-how, the service, full technology package, including the services. So a full technology package can be engaged in that. And it can be very limited also, in the sense that it can merely be limited to the licensing of patent. Moreover, when we talk about designs, softwares, technical services, they may not be embedded in the patent as such, but in the artifacts, and their transfers will also be an important component of the transaction that are done within the domain of the market for technology. So if you look at this kind of a definition, which is borrowed from Arora's work, is not very limited, and it is rather holistic and engage with different types of technology, and it's whether it is embodied or not embodied, and also in terms of how it will be transacted, that is the technological services as well. So then what for is the market? So you have these transactions where it may be related to technology, but what for? Now in that, say, it could be related to the product. Within the same product there might be a transaction between the companies. It might be a transaction which could be related to the vertically related suppliers and buyers, right? So within the value chain there might be a supplier and then other may be a buyer. They might get into a transaction with respect to any kind of a IP or a technical service, etc. Then the transaction, whether it is related to same product or to a vertically related supplier and buyer interaction, it can be with respect to the existing knowledge, what is already prevalent, or it could include the contracts for the creation of the new knowledge. So this particular typology once again builds on the work of Professor Arora and his co-author. Now, when we talk about, 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 in case of a horizontal we are looking at a process which is now going to be much more longer, relatively much more longer, and it is also going to be a bit more complex, and it may require that the investment is now made from the both sides as such. Say for example, if they are companies are now looking at a new way of maybe filtering the water, and they are looking for a new type of a filter, and instead of only one company getting engaged into it, they think that maybe a joint venture would be required. So or it could be that they say that okay, we will get into an contractual agreement to do this particular kind of an R&D, but the final outcome is related to a water filter. So then the process, again, investment may be required from both the sides. Again, a single party may not have a control over it. Both the parties will co-own any kind of an outcome which will come through this. So it may engage in some kind of a partnership or a joint venture base. So that is how it will be done as such. On the other hand, when we are looking at a vertical one, say for instance, a supplier comes up with the new equipment for the particular production process. It can sell it to the firm which is using that kind of a equipment. In this case, if you think from a point of view of provider, there is no risk, because in horizontal, what will happen, since there is a possibility that both the providers may be engaged in the same market, so the market share might in that case will be distributed among both of them. But this kind of a risk is not present in the vertical one, because the markets are different for all the suppliers and the buyers. Here the results could be much faster, because the process need not be one way, very complex, and it will be one way from A party to a B party. Whereas in case of a horizontal one, there will be more engagement at a level itself. The risk which some companies may get into is a dependency risk. So for example, if you buy a printer from a particular, let us say, company, and there is an associated, let us say, page or some other, cartridge, etc., that you have to buy from them. So then again, the person who is buying from that, they will be dependent on this. So this kind of a dependency with respect to the technology which is now being purchased from the other supplier, then can be a negative aspect of this kind of an interaction. And also the transfer may also happen with respect to the other companies which may be non-rivals for them, but could be rival for the one who has purchased it also. So this typology, as I said earlier, builds from the work of Professor Arora and co-author, is from the Market for Technology, which is published in Handbook of Economics of Innovation. This brings together these 4 points, like we have done here on this slide, where we have looked at that market could be for the same product or for the vertically one. It could be with respect to the existing knowledge, or it could be with respect to the creation of the new knowledge. So when we put them all together, what do we get? So let us look at this first case. Here we are talking about the smartphone producers licensing. So it is related to the existing technology. And then what we are talking about is a case of a horizontal transaction. That means these companies might be potential rivals, and the transaction actually happened between them. One can actually question why would they engage in this kind of licensing as such. So if you remember very early on, when we have looked at the example of the smartphone, we have seen there can be a patents engaged in a particular product from the different entities, and in order to make the product functional, you need to have the cross licensing being done. So it will depend upon the type of product which you are looking at, the technologies which are engaged in, which will in that case will make the companies get involved into this kind of a market. Then of course there could be R&D joint venture between the rivals. If they find that it is not possible for one of them to come up with a solution with the challenges which are now being faced in the market, then they might enter into a joint venture. Like I gave you just an example for a water filter. Then it could be related to the existing technology, but in a vertical one. So here licensing of IP core in semiconductors. So clearly the company which is now licensing the IP core is not actually into the final product market. The last one could be again R&D joint ventures between the different parties at a different level of the value chain. So that could be the your case of a future technology transaction with the licensing among the non-rivals as such. Look at the types of license which are prevalent in the market, and here you will also see that this is not the exhaustive list, but some kind of an examples which are available. So one way to get into a transaction could be signing of an exclusive license. Here what we have, a licensee uses exclusively within the particular contract period or area. So the exclusivity in that case can be related to the area, geography or period, or both of them as well. It will depend upon the individual contract terms. Then standard practices, what kind of a minimum sales or what should be the minimum technical fee. So this would be a part of the contractual agreement that will be now transacted. Apart from that, there would be an issuance of the key issue here with respect to the exclusive license is that issuance of a similar license to a third party is not possible. So as being defined by what do you mean by exclusive license, the idea is that an identical license in that case will not be given to the third party. Then on the other hand, we can have a non-exclusive license where the license reserves the right to provide the license not only to a particular licensee but also to other parties as well. So if you see many a times, if particularly in the public funded research organization or from the university, if some very important outcome comes, let us say they find a vaccine for certain drug or some vaccine for certain disease or a virus, there is a possibility that they may say that we are giving one party a license. However, given our social responsibility, we may not engage into an exclusive licensing. We will get into a non-exclusive licensing so that other companies can make use of this particular technology, make more and more vaccine, and then help the society. Then there could be sub-licensing. Sub-licensing is where a technology using party who has been given the license can indeed offer it to the third party also. And in this case, the idea here is that it can be used efficiently when a single technology is diversely utilized in terms of usage, purpose and area as such. Then cross-licensing, this kind of an example we have seen. Here the focus is that the parties now they are mutually exchanging and using the technology. So the contract terms are rather mutual. Few license as being transacted from one end and the sum are from the other end. Then there could be something like a package license. Here you have within a single contract you may have a technology, you may have an IP, certain equipment is being given and a component or capital etc. So they are comprehensively provided within this particular kind of a package licensing. So here if you look at the process, now how do you get this technology transfer being done? Clearly it is a complex process. What we try to do here is just to give you an idea of how and what are the different steps that might be engaged in it. For instance, if you think from a point of view of a buyer now who is looking for an alternative technology, maybe like I said earlier, they are looking for a new type of a technology in a water filter. Earlier we were going for this ROs, now we find that certain technology related to copper has also come. Suppose somebody is now wants to use this particular technology within their product. So what will they do? First of all, they have to discover it. They have to find, the search cost is engaged, and they have to look for the competing technologies, figure out which are the companies engaged in it, and then put up a request for the transfer. Apart from that, the next step would be is to get into the technology evaluation. Here one has to get involved into a qualitative and a quantitative evaluation of the technology. They have to analyze the possibility of the any kind of a clash they may emerge if suppose a third party is owning the technology. They also have to match the technology with respect to whatever existing setup they might have, whether it will be easy to absorb in it and will be easy to kind of use within the existing plant. They might have to involve into a pre-analysis of whether the transfer technology can lead to a certain kind of a competitiveness if they are looking for transfer overseas, etc. So clearly they have to engage in a technology evaluation as such. After that, having done the evaluation, having understood that yes, this is the technology we should get engaged with, the next point would be with respect to negotiation and contracting. Here again you have to establish a strategy. You have to figure out what is the bargaining power of the other party. You have to find out what are the positives with them, and again maybe the things which can work against them. You might have to consult on the major conditions associated with the use of the technology. examine the draft contract, calculate the technical fee, and again figure out the the blueprint, as well as the ensure that all the points which may have an impact on the use of technology, the payment that has to be made, has been taken care of. Many a times the companies may indeed engage with certain consultant who would be with respect to the technology transfer. But this things does not stop here. Clearly some kind of a management is required after the agreement also, because the company which is licensing the technology, they would be done away with, but the person who's buying or on the other end is actually going to use the technology, they would be dealing with it, they would be using it for the final production, etc. Then if something goes wrong, or if it doesn't work out as per their requirement, they have to figure out what to do in that case. So the compliance to the conditions of the contract, particularly post the agreement, whether what would be the inspection related, whether there will be some kind of a reporting that has to be done, whether the other party will come and in fact help them with any kind of a technical problem that may emerge after the transfer happens as such. So these are the very broad steps which are involved from a buyer's point of view, that one has to get involved in order to ensure that the technology is transferred. That is term of market for technology, is it something which is a 21st century phenomenon, or it has been existing earlier also? Very interesting study in this case we find, and which highlights that there was a very vibrant market for technology during the 19th century. So this is the reference given in the end, and the study is actually talking about how over a period of a time the independent inventors they decline, but the cases which they have highlighted in the study are very much of interest for the way we visualize and understand the market for technology. They point out that the bulk of this early commerce in patents, in fact 80 to 90% of the transactions during 1850s, they involved efforts by inventors to make multiple assignment of their rights for different geographically restricted areas. So it's not only that they were getting into transaction within the same geography, but also around. So the example which is given of a Thomas Blanchard, who was an inventor of the gun stocking lathe, which is a wood bending machine, and also a variety of other devices, and exploited this possibility to the hilt. For example, he used his lathe himself to make a gun stock for the Boston market and for export. He also leased the rights to use the invention to gun producers operating in other locations, and to manufacturers making shoe laws, to tool handles, wheel spokes, and a variety of other goods in different places around the country. So clearly Thomas Blanchard has made the best use of the technologies which he was coming up with, not only getting into the production himself, but also getting engaged with the other manufacturers across the country, within the country. Next, the role of technologically creative and specialized inventors in this case was very important. So the study highlights that by 1910-11, inventors who have with 10 or more career patents, they in fact were assigning 62.4% of their patents by the date they were issued. So that means that the individual inventors, the focus of their energy, of the creative energy, was indeed to come up with the new inventions, to find a solution, to figure out how to be done, and then licensing was being used as a way to now generate revenue from that particular creative activity. So the idea here is the one who has now more patents were using this market for technology in order to get the commercial gains from their creative activity. Then by earlier 20th century, it also did see a rise of the very large scale businesses within the in-house R&D laboratories, and particularly science based industries. We have seen examples of General Electric, IBM, etc. So these talented inventors then started getting employed more in these large labs as such. But clearly we had a very active and a thriving market for technology in the end of 19th century and first few decades of the 20th century. Moreover, what highlight that there has been a resurgence of this market of technology in the American context in the 1980s as well, which is in fact now supported by a greater tradability of knowledge and the increased scope of the new technologies. So what it highlights is that there are young technology based ventures and they could actually get the funding from the capital market, and that is extended, which can be now extended in the scope and sophistication. Moreover, science and engineering basis of the technological change, it also has grown up, and as a result the efficacy of the patent protection has also improved. These are the points which has further facilitated the markets for technology in the 1980s. There's an improvement in the instrumentation, particularly information technology, which is strongly complementing the use of scientific knowledge. So the other some more reasons which has led to this resurgence in market for technology is technology integration and combinations have become possible. The technology life has also reduced. So as a result, what happens? You want to move fast, and if you tend to get everything on your own, then clearly the movement would not be as agile. As a result, you might get involved with the different other technology providers. Moreover, what we have is a very rapidly changing market demand. So if the market demand is changing, say for example, we have seen earlier phones without the cameras, then the one came with the cameras, and within the cameras there has been more better features which are now being added. So in this case, to be able to do each of those attributes on their own is going to be very difficult for the company. So then why not take it a license from somebody who is already doing it, and then increase the attributes of your own product. The cost has also reduced of the acquisition. One of the major costs engaged with the acquisition of the technology was the discovery and the search cost. That has come down considerably, and also the contractual cost. As I said earlier, engagement with the consultant can help it. Then also the last is the post management, where in case of any dispute, how do you deal with it? So clearly there has been improvements and efficiency improvement in all these categories. As the result, the overall technology transaction acquisition cost has now come down. Moreover, the companies might be more interested in diversifying their risk. In that case, it becomes very difficult once again to do everything on their own, rather get engaged into maybe with the market of technology and see what would work best for the company as such. Address this very important question of why the market for technology. Arora, in his paper, has in fact said that let us understand this argument by a counter argument. What if the market for technology is missing? So then, in order to ensure the financial benefit from any technology, any innovator and inventor now, what they have to do, they have to use or exploit the technology in-house. They have to do everything on their own. It has to be embodied in goods or services which will then be sold. So technology embodied product must have either lower cost or command a higher price. So that means the exploitation of any technology in view of the lack of the market for technology will be limited to the individual inventors and innovators. As we have said earlier, this would may require a very different type of a skill set. So it is easier said than done. Why? What we have that in order to do that, the so-called in-house exploitation, the firms must have access to the complementary factors: plant, machinery, other physical equipment, distribution channels, marketing teams, and so on. Not only that they should have access and the capability to use these complementary factors, but they must also be able to attain large volume of output and produce that particular output, sell that in the market, and be able to make profit from that. Now think that what if the inventing firm indeed does not have access to those assets, and moreover those kind of an assets are also not available for trading in the market. That means it is not that these companies will be able to now go and kind of buy them and then build up entire product. Suppose they are not, then what will you do? So clearly any kind of a firm which will have a greater access to such assets, they can get better returns from that, and as a result they will grow into very large firm. So then, I think we have also discussed this point earlier. The TES has pointed that firms, they must now invest in the complementary asset in order to maximize their return from IP. So clearly, any kind coming up with any invention in that case, in view of lack of a market of technology will lead to what? It will give an undue advantage for a large firm, and what we will find is that the small firms in that case will suffer, and it will create more problem in their development and commercialization. However, in real life situation, we may find that even large firms get involved into the markets for technology. We will understand that in a while. So what if the now technology can be sold? If that happens, then clearly the importance of the complementary asset is now greatly diminished. That means now innovator has much more options. They can in fact focus their energy on the innovation itself and rather choose to sell or license it to others. Then we find that in this case, the innovating firm, they need not also become a purely licensing companies also, and so there can be a strategic decision with respect to what to license and what not to license as such. But there are examples of firms which has become very successful as a specialized technology suppliers. Instead of investing in the complementary asset, taking the pain of identifying maybe the raw material producers and buying from them, undertaking the entire production, going through the distribution channel, getting engaged with the advertisement, finally selling the product, why not become a successful specialized technology supplier? So then that has created a separate kind of a category itself in terms of what a companies or inventors can do. So the final choice, like we said earlier, it is not that they may transfer all the technologies. Some may in fact think of getting into production with few. The final choice when it will come to, it will in fact depend upon the strategic consideration of the firm. Like for instance, what is the competition in the market of product vis-a-vis the technology market. So there is a possibility now that a company which is thinking of getting into or becoming into a technology supplier in a particular field, let us say they are thinking in terms of maybe something related to AI. What they have to see that if we come up with the final product using this maybe AI technology, what kind of a competition we will face in that market vis-a-vis the competition we may face in the creation of this kind of a codes for different applications, right? So that will depend upon how do you understand the competition and how do you understand your profits are going to be maximized in which of the following situations, right? So then what is also the efficiency of market in other type of asset. Now when you realize that okay, we know this particular, maybe we have come up with this particular drone and it can actually carry some material, so maybe we are looking at for some kind of a way to spread the pesticides in the farm and lighten the weight of the farmer. So that kind of product you are thinking. So then clearly you will think that okay, we are into drone technology, maybe we can better it or maybe make drones for different applications. That is one way to do it. Or we now get into production of this particular product, and you realize that in one of these categories the competition is less. But now you also need various other type of asset to support that activity. So what about the efficiency of the market in those cases? For example, finance and other transaction costs that will be engaged. So clearly the companies will have to make a strategic consideration. They have to calculate their costs, they have to calculate their benefits and the profits that they will get from different opportunities that is now being presented by having an access to a newer technology or by creating that newer technology. So in that sense, what you will find that the efficient technology market will act as a great leveler, because it will actually stop some companies from becoming very big. As we saw earlier, that if there is no market for technology, then the companies will having a lot of complementary asset will have a strategic advantage. Now with if that is not the case, it is possible to have establish a market for technology and then kind of getting involved with the final product, etc. Then you will find that having an efficient technology market in that economy would be a great leveler. It will be difficult for only a company to become too big or one player to become too big as such. So now let us see what are the different sources through which a company will gain from the trade. Now we will not first we will, let us say, look at from the point of view of a large company, and you see that some of them will also be applicable from the small company's point of view. Though the challenges which will be faced by a large company vis-a-vis that a small company is now going to be very different. So one of the three reasons or three sources through which the gains will accrue is clearly a comparative advantage. So the companies might be much better at doing something, maybe inventions, rather than doing the final production. So if they have that kind of a comparative advantage, then clearly they can engage in that particular activity. Apart from that, very straightforward, the companies will get the licensing revenue. Moreover, if you see that technology is infinitely exhaustible, as being pointed out by Professor Dasgupta and his co-author, then what you will realize that there are potential sources to make revenues from a technology, and it is not possible for a company to make use of all those kind of potential options. Think from point of view of any technology which is more general purpose technology, right? Now it is not possible that that one company is able to maybe create or provide the solutions to all the possible areas in which that GPT can be applied. So then it makes sense to give it to a license, and the user let them find the possible solutions to the different problems using this kind of a particular technology. So given these three sources through which the gain will now accrue to the companies by licensing. Now apart from that, the companies will be able to enjoy monopoly power to promote their technology as a dominant standard and to provide incentive to the potential adopter, and again, like we said earlier, limited access to complementary assets. So these 4 points also will support the decision of the companies to go for a licensing. If they give it to license, then clearly the users, more and more users are now going to be more dependent on them. As a result, if you want to establish that as a standard, which is now being used by the lot more people, clearly it will become easy for you to do if you license it to many providers. On the other hand, if you want, like we said earlier, if you have a limited access to complementary asset, then clearly it would be more a better strategy to follow. On the other hand, there can be limiting factors, right, which will limit the potential gains that can come to a company from the licensing as such. So what are those limiting factors? Clearly, there market imperfections, there is an asymmetry of information. The party which is now going to transact the particular technology, say for instance, a company has maybe a new water purifier which they think they may not get engaged into final production, but they want to give it to the others, and they will realize that the one party to that particularly the company which has created the invention, they may have a better information about the working of the technology, about when it can work, how it will work, what are the maybe the slight problems associated with that. On the other hand, the buyer may not have that kind of information. So clearly, the kind of market that we are dealing with is having an asymmetric information. We have explained that concept quite in detail earlier, where in a market where there are two parties and one party has a better access to information as compared to the another one. And this kind of an asymmetric information in many a times will actually lead to the problem of the market failure, until and unless it is being dealt by certain methods. For instance, having a patent in that case can be supportive, because in the patent there would be a required documents of the information of how the technology works, etc. Apart from that, the grant of the patent will give a confidence to the other party that okay, there might be certain novelty into it. So there are certain ways through which more signaling can happen from one party to another. However, in view of the fact that this information might be now not symmetrically spread across both the parties, there is always a possibility of a market failure. Then there can be problems with respect to the contractual agreements. So if the output is finally not defined, if the exchange of information is problematic, then the monitoring costs are associated, potential lockup. Say for example, you have purchased this particular way of maybe purifying water which is based on maybe bronze, whereas within few months you realize that the other companies are using copper. Now because you got into a contract with this particular company and you are using their technology, you get locked up and suddenly a better technology has come up. So there are contractual problems which we can get into. Most importantly, there are cognitive factors, particularly the context dependence and absorptive capacity, which can play a very significant role in terms of the acceptability, adaptation, adoption of the technology from the buyer's point of view. So when we will look at the buyer's perspective, we will understand that what could be the constraining factors, particularly with respect to absorptive capacity. So then one very natural question arises, when is it that the licensing works better? So TS has identified that it will depend upon what kind of a technology is there. Is it easily transferable? What is the strength of the intellectual property rights, which will give the confidence to the seller in terms of how much knowledge to transfer. What were the type of complementary assets that would be required? Is it ease of replication while transferring vis-a-vis ease of imitation as such? And the research has highlighted that the appropriation through licensing will work best when there exists a substantial gap between the replication and imitation cost. Clearly, in this case, the buyer will have very limited motivation to imitate. They would rather use the technology through a proper licensing agreement. Moreover, it will also depend when the underlying knowledge base is sufficiently codified. IPRs are well defined. I highlighted to you the problem related to information asymmetry in case of a transaction of the technology. If that information asymmetry is existing, then clearly well defined IPRs are going to be very, very helpful. So under those conditions, the licensing can work better.